There are some that make the news and are in it constantly. I mean, day after day, it's nonstop coverage of this person. You kind of get sick of seeing their face in the news all the time. Then, well, life moves on. You don't hear from them anymore. And you wonder, are they still out there? Are they still busy? And if you look at their itinerary, they're busier than ever before. That's the first question I have for Colonel Oliver North, who's on the phone. Colonel, good to talk to you this morning.
Glenn, I'm looking forward to seeing you out there on the 28th.
Yeah, and as I was just saying, in your little introduction here, I'm thinking, yeah, I know there was a time that every time I turned on the news, there was your face. Every time I turned on the radio, I would hear your voice. And now we don't see that so much anymore. But when I look at your itinerary, it's not like you've retired.
No, not yet. I'm still a youngster. I'll turn 76 here in October. And I figure I'm going to start looking at that around 80.
Yeah.
As long as still upright this side of the dirt, what the heck, man?
So what are you doing with, I know there's the speaking tours, of course, like that's one of the reasons you're coming to this area. Are you still writing books, or what else are you doing with your time?
In fact, if I don't have the book in 2 days after I'm with you out there on the 28th, my publisher will find somebody to lynch me.
Okay. So, wait a second, because that's intriguing.
Almost finished.
What's the book about?
It's about the American Revolution. The title of the book is The Rifleman. Mm-hmm. It's about an unknown American hero by the name of Daniel Morgan. And Daniel Morgan, if he were still alive, would be a neighbor of mine in Clark County, Virginia. Back in those days, it was Frederick County. He was a close friend of George Washington. He'd gotten to know Washington during the French and Indian War, and when he was a wagoneer, young guy, and becomes very close to Washington, and is crucial in several battles. First of all, he gets captured in Quebec in 1775. Actually, it's New Year's Day, so it's 1776. He gets captured, held as a prisoner of war, exchanged, comes back, and is the key to the battle at Saratoga in upstate New York that convinces the French to come into the war on our side. And then his next really big battle is down in South Carolina, the place that's commonly referred to as cow pens, because there were a lot of cow pens in those pastures down there when he actually beats Tarleton. And all this leads up to the great victory at Yorktown, which ends the war effectively, even though the treaty doesn't get signed for 2 more years. But Cornwallis gets defeated at Yorktown, and that's the key to the defeat of the British.
Are you mostly writing about history these days, or are there other topics?
No, in fact, the last one I did was a future book.
Okay.
It's written in the term of the first female president. And it involves a lot of very futuristic. I wrote it in 2010, published it in 2011, and remarkably, a lot of the things that are in that book are beginning to happen. Hypervelocity weapons and lots of what we in the media call drones. They're really not drones, but they're flown without pilots.
Okay.
So all those kinds of things and remarkable technology that. Of which is going to be pushed by some of the events we're seeing the president just talked about here today.
Well, let me actually hit on that, because you just intrigued me a little bit. When you were working at the Pentagon, you were in the know on so many different things. Did you take a look, when you look at today's technology, did you kind of see some of that coming, or is it some of it a surprise to you?
Well, when I was at the White House, so I got there in July of 81, we didn't even have internet as we know it today. We didn't have email. In fact, John Poindexter, my boss, the National Security Advisor, was the guy who invented the first email. And is a remarkable genius. I mean, he's still at it. He headed DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, for a while. An extraordinary guy. He saw those kinds of things coming, and he put around him young guys that could make it happen. I was off on different projects, as the world now knows, but it was the kind of thing where John Poindexter was looking downrange and saying, we're going to have this thing called an internet. It's going to be open to everybody. It's going to provide opportunities for bad people to do bad things. And so the whole idea, I think, is one that, and the president mentioned this today. He talks about the proper use of technology and the improper use of it. And, when you start getting into doing things like he recommended today, and that is using the internet to peruse through people's musings, because almost all these perpetrators of these terrible events have done something like that. They've told others. So then the question is not so much the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment. If you and I exchange emails, is that automatically something that somebody else ought to be able to look at in an official capacity of the government, federal or state, whether it's Wyoming or whether it's Virginia where I'm sitting? So those are questions that we need to answer.
Sure, and I
ultimately, what I think the goal of certain people is, and I call them the Disarm America movement, is, for example, the perpetrator, as far as I know, the perpetrator of the event in El Paso, I don't know about Dayton, but the perpetrator of the event in El Paso publishes a manifesto that says he's basically full of hate. And we ought to all condemn that kind of behavior. The question is someone allowed to say that legally? Or is that the same as yelling fire in a crowded theater?
Yes, we had some really good calls from all across this, and like I said, from up near the Montana border all the way down to Denver and so on this morning. I mean, quite a few good calls on this from people, and our main discussion was, and I'd like to hear you weigh in on this. As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to an act of mass murder, be it terrorism or just some nutball, I am not at all concerned with the tool that they use, because there are so many different ways to do it, so many different ways it has been done. I'm more interested in, one, properly identifying somebody in advance if you can see red flags come up. But then here's the thing, Colonel North, is what do you do about it without infringing on people's constitutional rights or someone weaponizing that?
Yep. No, and that is, I think, ought to be the concern of all of us. Look, the Second Amendment is a civil right. So is the First. And so if that perpetrator publishes his manifesto, let's say 6-8 weeks in advance instead of 6 or 7 hours in advance, and somebody sees it, the Parkland killer, those kinds of things are red flags that properly, the old adage you and I have heard it 1,000 times, if you see something, say something, will help. Lots of people saw things and reported it. And in the case of Parkland down in Florida, nobody did a damn thing. And that's part of the problem. And so when I listened carefully to what the president said this morning, I agree with all of the points that he made about stopping these kinds of horrific crimes. But there's an important sidebar to that that's not mentioned. Evil exists in this world. It's not going to go away because we make a new law. It's not going to go away because we change the shape or the color of a firearm. Those kinds of things that happen, if the law enforcement isn't already working on it, they should be. And what I'm suggesting is that the movement that is led by people like Mr. Bloomberg and the governor of New York and the governor of Virginia, okay, those guys are going to find out, as we all do, that evil is not stopped by a new law. And at some point they come out and they say, just like happened in New Zealand, that's it. We've tried everything else. Now let's just disarm America, repeal the Second Amendment. And at that point, we're in serious trouble.
Okay, well, this is a perfect segue into why you're coming out to this area, because a big part of our discussion this morning was what to do with young people, raising them up properly. And you're going to come here and speak to the Boys and Girls Club. 50 years, by the way, they've been around.
Yep, 50 years. And you know what? If you start looking back at the data of the perpetrators of major crimes, not only mass killings, but major crimes, there's very, very few kids who've gone through the Boys and Girls programs in this country who've gone out and perpetrated those kinds of crimes. They become better family members. They become better members of the community. They help law enforcement instead of hurting it. A lot of them end up going into law enforcement or in the military. They serve their country. And all of that's because Boys and Girls Clubs, like the one you've got right there in Casper, and some great folks that we're going to honor while we're there, the Schmitz, those kinds of things are crucial to the future of this country. And I'm sincere about that. Those kinds of community-based programs that look after the needs of the community, and particularly the young people, change the outcomes for almost all of them. Yeah, there's exceptions, but very few.
Yeah, mentoring I think is probably one of the most important things for a young person. Okay, so it's August 28th. You're going to be there. Casper Event Center. Doors open at 6:15. Breakfast buffet begins at about 6:30. And what exactly are you going to be speaking about?
I'm going to talk about the kinds of things that the community leaders do to make for better communities, better states, and a better country. And the Boys and Girls Clubs across America, just like the one there in Casper, are doing just exactly that. I'm going to give you 4 big points on it, but I don't want to give them away now. I want everybody that's listening to you and me be there on the 28th.
Okay, so Colonel Oliver North coming to the state of Wyoming again, 28th, Casper Event Center. Doors open at 6:15 a.m. Breakfast begins at 6:30. You're going to get a chance to walk out into the crowd and say hello to everybody.
Oh, sure,
okay,
absolutely,
good.
absolutely.
Well, I just don't like it when I see a speaker who gets up there and says hello to everybody, talks, and then just disappears. Like,
No, I'm there.
Yeah,
I'll be there. Sign some books, pictures, the whole thing.
Okay,
I look forward to it, man.
All right, hey, Colonel North.
By the way. It would be nice if you'd bring the temperature down just a little bit. It's actually hotter where you are right now.
Really? Okay, here's the deal. You're talking to you know where Sanibel and Captiva Islands, Florida?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, those are my homehtowns. Humidity. Add these temperatures with humidity. Here, since I've been living in Wyoming, I step outside where it's 94 degrees, and I'm like, you don't know hot.
It's a dry.
It is a dry heat.
You're right. It is a dry heat.
That's why I'm not so worried about hell. It'll be a dry heat. Colonel North, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to seeing you, Glenn. Thank you, buddy.
9:18 is the time.